Good morning and welcome to a special Sunday edition of Morning Joe. It is May 24th. We come on the air today as the national death toll approaches 100,000 killed by COVID-19. It's a staggering figure, illustrated in striking terms on the front page of today's New York Times. Here, 1,000 names, just a fraction of the overall loss, are stacked side by side, top to bottom, in what the paper calls an incalculable loss. And as the Times notes, they were not simply names on a list. They were us. Among them, Romy Cohn, 91, from New York City, saved 56 Jewish families from the Gestapo. Lavinia Henderson, who was 44, from Tonawanda, New York, a proud single mother of 3. Alan Lund, 81, from Washington, a conductor with the most amazing ear. Teresa Eloy, 63, from New Orleans, renowned for her business making detailed pins and corsages. And Kobe Adolph, who was 44, from Chicago, an entrepreneur and an adventurer. Lila A. Fenwick, from 87 years old, from New York City, was the first Black woman to graduate from Harvard Law School. We come on the air this morning ahead of Memorial Day, a time in which the country pauses to remember its veterans, all those who gave the last full measure of devotion, and all those still serving today. We come on the air in search of leadership for a nation in crisis, in the middle of a human catastrophe, for a people divided, and for the chance to get this country back on firm footing. Along with Joe and me, we have White House reporter for the Associated Press, Jonathan Lemire, columnist and associate editor for the Washington Post, David Ignatius, and historian and author of The Soul of America, John Meacham.
John, I look through these names and there's Dwayne Vaught from Mission, Kansas, a proud Army vet who served in World War II. Mary Santiago from Evanston, Illinois, who just loved being a mom. April Dunn, a 33-year-old advocate for disability rights in Louisiana. Thomas Reel, 61, from Newton, Pennsylvania, who was at peace most when he was on his Harley. Like the Times said, they were us. A Green Bay Packers ticket holder, the leader of a prayer circle, a college basketball assists winner, a Tony Award-winning writer, an innovative high school principal, a nurse in the COVID fight, an assistant pastor, and a dad who dedicated his entire life to his children. And John, there seems to be no historical parallel, though I know a lot of people certainly remembered back in 1969 when Life magazine showed pictures of 1 week's dead in Vietnam, and it jarred the nation to its core. I suspect this will serve as a wake-up call for those who thought we could just sort of turn our eyes and move on.
No, I salute the New York Times for a brilliant use of design to convey a point. And for those who suspect that print has no role, I refer you as Exhibit A to this edition of the newspaper. It's in the business you call small type agate type, and in this case, in the agate type, they have managed to convey something that the President of the United States, in many ways, does not want conveyed, which is the scope and scale and depth of the costs of this pandemic. And I think you're right about the Life magazine piece. I remember the Times also did the remarkable job with 9/11, with the lives we lost. And it's a reminder that for all of our communally hour conversations about politics and personalities, that fundamentally this is about people. It's about human beings. And the root of the word politics is from city. It's from it's a collection of people. That's the Aristotelian meaning of it. And I think that the pandemic has, in a way that even war does not have, this universality of threat. And I thought, and we talked about it, I thought looking back at the beginning of March, perhaps we will avoid a partisan pandemic. We have not. But we have the capacity always to address our issues with some national purpose if we had the right leadership.
Well, I will say, Mika, that we actually, if you look at what Americans have done, if you ignore a lot of the destructive nonsense coming out of Washington, and you just look at what Americans have done, what they're telling pollsters, but more importantly, the fact that in the state of Florida, for instance, studies have shown, and there's been reporting that just following cell phone data, that Floridians sheltered in place and began protecting their families, even when their leaders were bumbling about. And we did bend the curve. We did that as a nation. Unfortunately, so many politicians, and yes, you can say Republicans mainly, but also there were some Democrats who were a little slow in moving forward. Americans did that, and still only 8% of Americans are saying they don't want to wear a mask. The overwhelming majority are not only worried about themselves and their families, but they're actually concerned about others.
And if you look at the losses, Joseph W. Hammond, who was 64 in Chicago, who stopped working to look after his aging parents. Stanley Chera, who was 77. He was a New York City developer and a friend of the president. Mary Lou Armour, 43 years old, from Sonoma Valley, California, a veteran police detective. Daniel Spector, who was 68, from Memphis, who was a mentor to other Memphis artists. He was an artist. Dale Thurman, who was 65, from Lexington, a tailor known for his exacting work and strong opinions. And Thomas Waters, who was 56, from New York City, who armed the affordable housing movement with data and analysis.
David Ignatius, these are those who we have lost as we move toward 100,000. As John Meacham brought up, we all remember reading the New York Times and the faces of those who we lost on 9/11, and that loss seemed so incalculable. It's almost hard to believe that
it's unimaginable.
We lost that many people in a single day in this pandemic. A single day in April when the President of the United States said it was going to magically go away. The same president who in January said that this was just one person coming in from China and it was going to go away. Look at the 100,000 dead. It didn't go away. Or what he said in the end of February when, and we've said it on this show before, the end of February, he said it's only 15 people. Soon it will be down to zero. We've done a great job. There's nothing to worry about. Or in March, even, he was asked after receiving panicked cries from his own administration over a month and a half ago. Peter Navarro saying 500,000 souls could be lost. That was at the end of January. In March, we have a president running this who still is saying he's not worried at all. It'll go away, assuring Republican senators don't worry about it all. So we look at those names, we hear those stories, we look at the incalculable loss, and there's a great concern about what's ahead of us. Because while we're being warned once again, like the president was warned before, but this time we're being warned about the fall, we have someone engaged in magical thinking who's saying, don't worry about the fall, it's not coming back.
Joe, when we look at that New York Times front page, and I think it will stick in all of our memories as a symbol of this time and what it meant and felt like, it looks almost like a tombstone, all that type, all that black type. You just see it as a marker of what we've lived through. And yet, as you begin to read the stories, it's not a tombstone. It's almost a mosaic of who we are. You read each little fragment of the story and you see this is what our country is woven of. Each of these little stories that captured small details about people, what they loved, what they were good at, what mattered to them. I think we're all feeling that in some ways this is a wartime-like feeling. It's right before Memorial Day, so obviously that comes to mind. And I found myself thinking, what are we fighting for in this war? Every generation that has adversity, I think, asks two questions. One is there unity of effort? Are we all pulling together for the same goals as we're in this terrible struggle, as we see the death toll come back? I know that was true for my parents' generation, my grandparents. The second thing we ask is, what comes after this? What's the world that we're fighting to bring into being that will be different, where the things that we see and that trouble us aren't so present? And that's what I hope we'll think about the day after and the day after. What are we fighting for? What do we want to keep people alive for? And I think it's got to be a different kind of country. It has to be a country that feels fairer. It's got to be a country that's less crazily divided. Obviously, we can't keep living the way we're living now. It has to. A different America is going to emerge from that list of names, 1,000 names, the incalculable loss that the New York Times showed us this morning. I hope we'll think, okay, what country do we build now?